The Solana Hacker House's hackathon held in Miami over the weekend came to a halt after a bomb threat forced an evacuation of the cryptocurrency extravaganza event. Miami Police Department and a bomb squad responded following a, quote, credible security threat at the 5-day Bitcoin conference.
High-profile names like Andrew Yang, PayPal's Peter Thiel, and Serena Williams were among the attendees at the cryptocurrency event meant to educate about the blockchain world. Upon arriving, officials found no such credible threat, and the conference was cleared to continue. Here to talk about this weekend's crypto chaos and, more importantly, the future of this booming Bitcoin and crypto craze is David Wachsman, CEO at Wachsman and expert on blockchain. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So help us understand what exactly happened this weekend and what effect, if any, it has had on the popularity of this so-called crypto craze.
Well, I'd say the, let's call it Solana Hackathon bomb threat is just the end of what was a pretty wild week in Miami, as more than 25,000 people flocked all over Miami Beach to learn about Bitcoin. You saw every rented Lamborghini south of Naples, Florida, right, line up, mostly the orange ones, and out came Bitcoin investors who had made a lot of money by betting early on Bitcoin. It was a pretty crazy week, and of course that just capped it off.
Is there anything left for those people who didn't invest early? What are the prospects now for those who are just getting interested?
Well, I think one of the things we learned this past week is that Bitcoin is really at the early innings. One of the fun things about the conference when I was there was meeting all the people who, just for the first time, were learning about digital assets. Turns out that the Bitcoin bull, which premiered in front of the Miami Beach Convention Center and popularized by Mayor Suarez, was basically a symbol for people, an invitation for them to come in and learn more about digital assets. Many companies are today advertising. We saw 4 different Super Bowl ads this year focusing on buying Bitcoin. And the conference was basically just an illustration of this is now mainstream. A recent poll came out showing that more than half of Americans have a pretty good understanding of cryptocurrencies. And that portends that there's probably going to be a lot more purchasing in the future.
Yeah, it certainly is an interesting moment for Bitcoin. And you have Bitcoin, I think, has long been associated with some sort of non-establishment or anti-establishment causes and figures. Libertarianism, Andrew Yang was there, et cetera. And I've noticed a lot more conversation from mainstream political figures warning about Bitcoin. Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, both very alarmed about what this is going to do to financial security, et cetera. What do you think is the next the next conversation about Bitcoin? Because it is going mainstream to some degree. I agree with you, but that's also going to provoke this reaction from the countervailing sort of establishment forces who fear and hate all new technology, or think that this is going to hurt them or it's scary. And we're going to increasingly hear about that. I feel. What do you think is happening?
Well, we've certainly seen that more Republicans tend to support crypto and Bitcoin than do Democrats, although a good section of the blockchain caucus on the Hill actually turns out to be Democrat-led, which I think is fascinating. What we are seeing, however, is that younger representatives tend to be those who support digital assets, and the older crowd, including Elizabeth Warren, are quite against it. So what I think is the conversation as this becomes more and more mainstream, it's certainly going to turn more towards potential regulation, new types of policies that, of course, need to be potentially drawn up and passed. And, of course, all the various different agencies and the different bureaus underneath the Biden administration, they're taking a look at Bitcoin, digital assets, and central bank digital currencies, and they're investigating that right now.
Well, this weekend's brief disruption in Miami isn't slowing Bitcoin down. In fact, according to Forbes, rising gold prices could cause the currency to reach $1 million per coin. Again, what does this mean for the average person? Because I've got to say, I have covered Bitcoin and cryptocurrency probably 4 or 5 times on my own podcast at this point. And if I were trying to understand what side of the issue I should come down on, to your point, there is bipartisan consensus on both sides of the issue. There is an age disparity that goes on, but it's hard to find an ideological root. I've talked to people about how there's an interest in cryptocurrencies as a way to avoid sanctions and get around kind of the American hegemony in a global context, as we're talking about Russia and Ukraine. And there are people who are avoiding sanctions for good reasons and for bad reasons, right? There are individual Russians who are obviously able to use some of these alternative currencies to free up assets and get around sanctions that have nothing to do with them. And there's also an argument, depending on how you feel about this politically, that, it's good for various countries, depending on where you fall politically, to be able to avoid kind of the hegemony of Western economic tyranny. But for the average person, it does seem like we're being sold on something when you have all of these NFTs being pushed by celebrities and night show hosts and all of this stuff. How should normal people think about this?
Well, first, I think Bitcoin is much more important for people in the developing world than it is for Americans. But for Americans, this is a store of value asset like gold. That's really what it is. I wouldn't be buying Bitcoin expecting it to 10x. Kathy Wood, for example, is the one who mentioned that she thinks Bitcoin's going to hit $1 million down the road. She's a legendary investor on Wall Street. But for average Americans, I think they should see Bitcoin specifically as an asset that they can buy and hold for a long period of time as part of their portfolio, the way they might hold some bonds and some stocks. As far as the rest of the world goes, not only should they not be using Bitcoin to try to get around sanctions, it turns out Bitcoin is eminently traceable, and every single transaction on the blockchain is traced forever. But they should be able to look at it as, again, a way to perhaps hold and transfer assets in a way that makes a lot more sense than current banking type transactions today. This is Web 2.0 tech, and we've already moved on to Web 3.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
More Rising after this.